Alright guys, I literally just got home. I was out getting gas. Like I literally look a mess, but like I just had to come on here and say this, okay? So I was reading The Invisible Man, right? And so the book's about like racial injustice in the United States and like kind of the experience of being a black man during the 1950s. And I'm reading it and I'm like, a lot of these themes really are super relevant today and can be applied to America today. And I think that's one of the greatest things about the book. But then one of the things I was noticing that might not be as, noticeable, it's more sort of in the background of the book, I guess, is this theme of like environmental racism, urban planning, and things sort of in that realm of the built world, right? Okay, so hear me out. The book literally opens with the narrator living in the basement of a white only apartment building, okay? Like, I'll give some background on redlining, but let me just say, like, a white only apartment building, that is basically, I mean, it's not quite a perfect example of it, but still, that kind of really greatly encompasses the time period they were living in and how black people were treated when it comes to the housing market, right? So let me kind of give some context, right? So in the 1930s, the US had this really big housing crisis. So they're like, okay, we're going to build a ton of suburbs, right? And so then when they were doing that, they actually came out with literal laws that were like, okay, we're going to give better like mortgage insurance or just mortgages in general to white families, and specifically white families in these more affluent neighborhoods, right? And they would outline those neighborhoods in green or blue on a map. And then they would say, okay, and then these other neighborhoods, which we're not going to reward these same sort of insurance things to, those are where we're going to reward those mortgages to black families. So then all these black families ended up being forced into these red line neighborhoods because they were outlined red on the map. And now they didn't have the same kind of resources. They didn't have the same kind of insurance on their houses. So they couldn't afford the same kind of things, and they couldn't financially prosper like their white counterparts. All right, so how does this connect to the Invisible Man? He's living in the middle of the city, where this is a thing, by the way. It's still a thing, but you see it the most in the suburbs. Well, you see, I was seeing it. I was reading, and I was in this last chapter, and throughout the book, I kind of forgot about this, but I was reading this last chapter, and in this chaos going down in Harlem, he's quite literally forced down into the sewer, right? Like, literally, here, and I quote, on page 565, right? He says, but I was in a strange territory now, and someone, for some reason, had removed a manhole cover that I felt myself plunge down a long, deep drop that ended upon a load of coal that sent up a cloud of dust. I lay in the black dark upon the black coal, no longer running, hiding, or concerned. All right, so let me just clear something up. At first, he seems at peace, right? He's like, I was no longer running or concerned, because previously he was running from the cops. Now, I see this and I'm like, okay, so a couple pages later, he realizes, he's like, oh my God, I'm stuck in a sewer. I have to start burning everything in my briefcase to see. But when he first gets there, he's like, oh my God, I have the house. So that's actually the kind of feeling that a lot of these, minority group families had when they got a house in the suburbs. Little did they know they were receiving a far worse experience than their white counterparts that would actually go on for generations and create a lot of racial injustice in this country. Um, but yeah, so he's forced into this cover, and I kind of see this parallel. I'm like, okay, he's forced down into the sewer, just like all these black families are being forced into these, less desirable neighborhoods because of redlining. All right, so the last thing I want to touch on is environmental racism. Now, this one is like very hard to make a connection from in the book, but as you can see here, he says, that sent up a cloud of dust, okay? So let's just explain what environmental racism is. Basically, some areas, because of redlining, are cheaper for companies to set up in. So they set up their factories there, and then they release a ton of petrochemicals into the air, which basically make the air quality way worse, which leaves the people in those neighborhoods exposed to a lot worse air quality, which more often than not is going to be minority group neighborhoods because of redlining and because it's easier for factories to set up there. So I kind of see this. I'm like, okay, he's literally covered in dust from coal. Like, that's something that people are living with today. For example, there's this place called Cancer Alley. It's like an 85-mile stretch along the Mississippi between Baton Rouge and New Orleans, where literally there are so many petrochemical countries that the risk of cancer is 50 times greater. And guess what? The population there is predominantly black. Coincidence? No, it's not, right? Anyway, I just had to come on here and tell you guys that because I was thinking about it and I was like, this is insane. Like, he literally called it, and it's still super prevalent today. But yeah, hope y'all enjoyed. That was my little rant for today. Goodbye.